Hello once again from the Prim Reaper. I know I said that I was going to be returning to my Insidious Aspects of Social Justice series this month, but I've had another thing on my mind that's been keeping me up nights the last little while, and I've just been burning to talk about it. This video is going to be a little bit more personal in nature, but I think it's an important subject to talk about. It's tough to know where to begin because there are essentially two branches of different backgrounds to cover to get to my point. For simplicity, I'll start chronologically. As many of you know, I've been in the business of challenging feminism and its slow, virulent creep across almost every respectable agency and institution in our society for some time now. It started with my experiences in university, but it broadened to a more far-reaching approach. Everywhere I looked, I saw this ideology that talked of female oppression and patriarchy, which did not align with my personal life experiences in any way. And more I came to see how this ideology was not only not reflecting my experiences as a woman, but was actively harming a lot of men in the process. It's this reason why, as time went on, I dedicated more and more of my time and research to the study of men's issues. I knew it wasn't a popular field of study, and it was often difficult to dig through databases of research where searching for a topic like male victims of domestic violence would yield hundreds of results for female victims, tens of results for male perpetrators, and perhaps a handful of usable results for the topic I'd actually searched. I knew that in trying to publish a literature review on the subject, in a paper where I actively challenged feminism as a mechanism that is making things more difficult for male victims of domestic violence, I would have a much harder time finding a place that would be willing to take it without demanding the usual retinue of changes to make it sufficiently ideologically acceptable. Incidentally, I'll probably be making a video on that whole saga as well. But none of these challenges mattered to me. They didn't then, and they don't now. I'm not covering this subject because I wanted to make the popular or the easy choice, or to go into a field that would make me a boatload of money. I wanted to bring attention to men's issues because I could see that it was the right thing to do, because there is a whole group of people in the world who are suffering and who are not finding any support or kindness anywhere else. I saw that inequity as a travesty, and I wanted to work to challenge it. So it's all of this background information that led me to become affiliated both with Honey Badger Radio and with the Canadian Association for Equality. I feel like both of these groups have enriched my life tremendously with friendships, discussions, and interesting opportunities. Each are obviously different in their own ways, but each added richness to my own pursuit of supporting men and challenging feminism. For a long time, it's been kind of a nice balance. With HBR, it's a place where I can let out some of the fervent passion I often restrict on my own channel. With Cafe, it's a place where I can form professional relationships and exercise my diplomatic skills. And with my own channel, it's a place where I can try to take time to express my thoughts in a more measured, balanced way. I don't feel that any one of these is more authentic than the others. They just represent different sides of myself. And they also represent different ways in which I can try to be of service to men. And for the most part, these three divisions of my life have been living in harmony and have felt like an intertwining path towards a more positive future. But maybe that's just my terminal optimism speaking. Which leads into the other piece of background I mentioned earlier, the more recent one that really spurred on this video. I'm reluctant even to bring it up again, but Cafe posted a clip from an interview on their YouTube channel that some of you may already be familiar with. The video features a guest, that is, not affiliated with Cafe, talking about his own mental health practices with men. To say the least, to those of us who are versed in these issues, the things the fella said were, well, to be frank, abysmal, and really should have warranted at very least a disclaimer before posting the video, and ideally also should have been challenged at the time. I'm not intending to downplay any of that. I did a response myself on their channel if you would like to see it, but again, remember in that video I am wearing my Cafe hat rather than my Prim Reaper hat, so it's a little bit more professional and diplomatic. Anyway, I'm really not wanting to linger on that piece of it all for too long, as I already addressed most of those thoughts on HBR. But speaking of HBR, there was recently an individual on the show who basically said that Cafe as an organization should be effectively cancelled and that nobody should donate anything to them anymore. I'm not going to talk about that in depth. I'll address it further a little later in this video. But it was a perfect highlight to a subject that was already burning in my mind to write about. So with all of that background information covered now, we can get to the title topic. Walking the tightrope. The struggle around managing everything, not just around the issues that men face, but also the politics around the subject, the best practices, how to navigate relations with what in many cases may be hostile ideologies, and most of all, what the ultimate goal in all of this is. Well, let's begin with what the ideal scenario would look like. Obviously, if I could envision a perfect world, it would be one in which we return to a sense of normalcy, where needlessly divisive ideologies like hardline feminism and social justice are once again fringe ideas that nobody really takes seriously, and where we live in a world where we want to care for everyone, regardless of their sex or other immutable characteristics, and ensure that everyone has access to services that they need that provide those services in a non-judgmental manner. And hey, while I'm at it, let's wish for $1 million and the ability to fly. I don't mean to sound sarcastic there, but there's only so far wishful thinking will take you. I can walk through life knowing the way I feel about these ideologies and the way I feel about men's issues. I can do my best to speak about how I feel and to live in an authentic way that honors these things. But at the same time, it's not always going to be smooth sailing. Unfortunately, to many people, these ideas don't represent a rational, balanced viewpoint. In fact, many people find them personally offensive. And worse yet, a lot of people who feel this way have a significant amount of power in society. To stop beating around the bush, as I have mentioned in previous videos, with these topics it's not often as simple as being loud and proud and out in the open, as much as I wish it were. It requires a lot of careful dealings, including managing one's language and tone of voice. For example, in my courses, where I would challenge feminist ideas, I would often have to do so in subtle, careful, and professional ways. Let's think about this. When you have someone talking about something innocuous being oppressive to women, you would have a very different reaction depending on how you responded to it. If you were to say something like, "Actually, I feel like that kind of thinking oversimplifies the matter and runs the risk of undermining the woman's own agency and strength," you might have, and I regularly did have, people responding with things like, "Hey, I never really thought about it like that. Good point." Or, "Actually, I fully agree and thank you for saying so," with the subtext often being, "because I was afraid to say so myself." However, if you came into it aggressively saying, "This feminist nonsense is just encouraging victimhood mentality and assumes all men have nefarious goals in mind," as much as that second statement is just like, where's the lie? You would not have people responding favorably to it. In fact, you'd probably have people becoming quite defensive, and it may even negatively impact your grades in the course. This is just one example of what I'm talking about. In my experience, in order to get anything accomplished without getting immediately dismissed or shut down by anyone in a position of power, you have to thread the needle a little bit in how you go about discussing these things. This is not only in things like the example I provided, but also in bigger, more significant contexts as well, such as the position Cafe is in. And even in that agency, it's not always 100% agreed upon the extent to which we should focus on advocacy for men's issues versus development of services for men in need. The best path forward is rarely something that everyone is going to perfectly agree on. We all have our own ideals, our own experiences, our own biases, coloring what we see as being most important or the best way forward. Now, where things start to get a little bit hazy is where you start to see pushback from others. And I'm not meaning from those who consider themselves feminists or those who minimize the importance of men's issues. I'm talking about other MRAs. Other people who criticize feminism or social justice causes, or just others who are generally sympathetic to those ideas. You have some people who take a very hardline approach that you absolutely cannot talk with or trust anything a feminist says, that anyone who's even mildly supportive of the idea is tainted and can never be trusted again, and that not only should you never bother to try to talk with them or change their mind about anything, but that anyone who interacts with them in any way other than to tell them that they're a bunch of hateful misandrists, whether or not this is actually characteristic of their beliefs, is also persona non grata. Now, I'm not meaning to immediately sound like I'm coming down negatively on these people. I know a lot of them have been badly hurt in the past, and to a certain extent I think it's understandable that they would feel this way. But if I may offer a similar example, a lot of people who have turned to feminism have also been hurt, and I maintain that their pain and negative experiences do not justify any generalizing or hateful behavior on their part either. I think it's so important to be consistent, not only in what we expect from others, but also in how we ourselves act. I've been feeling this way more strongly than ever lately. I see so many people excusing behaviors from their own political side that they would screech to high heaven about if anyone from the other side were to engage in them. But the question remains, to what extent should we be willing to work with, dialogue with, or otherwise interact with those who have beliefs with which we disagree? Well, I think we can't even begin to know how to answer this without knowing what our goals are. In my view, I think the ideal goals are twofold. First, I think we want to create more services for men in need, and second, we want to minimize the kind of divisive beliefs in society that minimize male struggling and have ultimately led to the kind of disrespect towards men that has become all too common. Now, from my perspective, it's going to be a lot easier to do the first one than the second one, because at very least, many people with a social justice mentality can at least be convinced that many men are indeed suffering and that they too deserve to have supports. To behave otherwise is frankly delusional. The exact mental paths we take to get to that point may not, and in fact I would probably say usually do not, look the same, but ultimately we can come to the same conclusion. Now, as to the second point, challenging the ideologies that lead to divisive attitudes against men, this is a bit of a different beast. After all, many ways in which these ideologies gain ground are subtle and not overtly negative towards men. Let's think about some common talking points. We just want women to have equal rights to men. We want women to be free to determine the course of their own lives. We believe there are certain power structures in society that hold women back, and we want to challenge this. Those of us who are experienced in reading between the lines on this kind of rhetoric may be able to see the deeper underlying implications of blame in these statements, i.e. that women wouldn't have to fight for all of these things if men, or the patriarchy, weren't holding them back. But many people who are just going about their day-to-day lives and hear these kinds of statements would simply take them at face value and see them as no-brainers. Like, of course women should have equal rights. Of course women should be free to dictate their lives as we see fit. What kind of backwards individual would think otherwise? And therein lies one of the challenges about all of this. Because of course, those of us who challenge these ideologies certainly aren't challenging the idea that women should have equal rights. We're challenging the message of blame and negativity beneath such statements. However, if we're not careful, and in some cases even if we are, those who hold these ideologies dear won't see it that way. They'll see us as misogynists who want to maintain the quote-unquote status quo where men definitely hold all the power and women go back into the kitchen and make sandwiches. Even if they don't see it quite so bluntly, they will be likely to at least bristle at the idea that anything about their ideology is in any way hateful or causing harm to anyone else. I mean, think about it for a moment. If you held a string of beliefs dearly for a significant portion of your life, and even advocated on behalf of them, do you think you would feel particularly good about being told that your beliefs are actually harmful to another group of people? It would probably feel pretty painful to have to integrate that information into your self-concept, especially when you've been living under the assumption that your main focus has been to help people. I'm not saying that there aren't people who don't hold definitely antagonistic and even outright misandrist views towards men, and of course I think these people should be directly and publicly challenged. However, what I am saying is that treating everyone who even so much as identifies with the term feminist or who proclaims themselves to be in favor of social justice as though they belong to that hateful camp is not only unfair, it's divisive on our end, and is likely to push people away from our cause. Remember what I said about being consistent? This is why I have always tried to focus on my activism in a softer way, by trying to educate and foster empathy in others, while also trying to remain open and understanding to their perspectives. If someone proclaims themselves to be a feminist but appears genuinely sympathetic to men's issues, the last thing I would want to do is push them away. I would want to support that, and if it was appropriate, for example, if they expressed views that may indicate some generalizing or oversimplistic thinking, perhaps begin to engage with them gently as to ways that ideology might run counter to their support of men. These ideologies are mainstream and have a lot of power. No matter how you disagree with them, you're not going to make them go away by coming at them with insults and vitriol. They will readily spew it back at you, and I'm sorry to say, they have the institutional power behind them to make those retorts really stick. If we want to challenge these ideologies and challenge them effectively, I think it's far more likely that we have to do it piece by piece by modeling the kind of respect and dignity we want to receive in return. If we hold to this, they will gradually lose the ability to dismiss our concerns by making us out to be a bunch of misogynist incel losers, and our message will become stronger and more obvious to the average general populace who are otherwise less tuned into these issues. I feel like I'm going a bit far afield now, so I'm going to draw back to the matter of the egregious interview with Cafe and the backlash from a few individuals that followed. I would have handled the matter differently, of course, as I've already said. However, I don't think that in any stretch that it is a serious enough violation in any way to discredit all of the work that Cafe has done up until now. After all, they are one of few agencies who has managed to successfully open branches and create services for men, including the only domestic violence shelter directly dedicated to men and their children across Canada. While this one video may be a singular example where Cafe may not have lived up to goal number 2 that I listed above, that is, challenging divisive ideologies, I think that they have more than made up for that in successfully completing goal number 1, that is, creating services for men in need, time and time again. And keeping in mind that they have managed to do this in spite of a society that has often been against them. You have only to look at their Wikipedia page to see how people continue to smear their name as angry misogynist MRAs while dismissing all of the work that they have done. Regardless of this kind of dismissive attitude, however, Cafe has managed to build a lot of different services while building positive relationships with other agencies in the community, many of which do happen to be based in feminist backgrounds, but they have built those relationships while holding true to their own position rather than giving into their perspectives. And I think a large part of their success has been because of their respectful and dignified approach. The same approach I try to model in my own life. So when people look at this one incident and then say something like, okay, this agency is done, time to cancel it, we really have to look at where their mindset is coming from and what their goals are. They're seeing an interview with a fellow from an outside agency where a member of Cafe did not challenge or disagree with them. They're taking this as tacit approval from Cafe of their methods and beliefs, rather than, say, a situation where one individual who may be less tuned in to recognizing what are actually male-negative statements from feminist rhetoric didn't want to come across as disrespectful to his guest and wanted to support what appeared to be a genuine interest in helping. They're taking this as an indication that Cafe is falling into feminist beliefs, which may be then seeping into its services, and that feminist services for men are worse than no services at all. And they're assuming all of this despite Cafe's stated goals and despite many internal members coming out to assure that these assumptions are inaccurate and that we have remained committed to our goals from the beginning. So with all of this being said, Anyone who says that cafe is now beyond reproach for this one incident, think about what it is you're doing. Think about your goals for supporting men. Do you want to seek ideological purity at the cost of everything else? Is no men's agency adequate unless they are serving the cause in the exact way that you see fit? Do you think that you can accurately judge the services being provided across a country with multiple branches based on one individual performing an interview? Do you really want to minimize support for the one agency that is successfully building services for men in need, the cost of which being that those services could eventually die off and that these men could find themselves once again without any aid? I think, unpleasantly, about the misandrists who jeer and insult what they perceive to be men's rights groups, who claim that they all hate women and that they should be shut down. I can't help but think that these individuals, who resist the idea that men deserve any help, would applaud your efforts. Just something to think about. Anyway, I'm sorry if this video came across as a little disorganized. These are thoughts that I've been batting around for some time now and have been struggling with for the better part of a month. I really don't mean to come across as overly critical or to imply that there's only one successful way to make change, but I do recognize where there is potential for shooting oneself in the foot, and I think it's important to examine yours and your political allies' views and goals in order to be vigilant for any risks of such possibilities coming up. We have to know what we are working towards. The last thing we want is to let any petty infighting get in the way of our ultimate goal. Too many men hang in the balance to make such a mistake. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next one.